Welcome to the Enchoris podcast. Today's episode is about AI, why we need conferences where people meet and exchange opinions. And our guest is Michael Aust, who's the CEO of Televisor Troika GmbH, the founder of Soundtrack Cologne and Soundtrack Zurich, and he's a producer on multiple movies and documentaries, and additionally he has made his directorial debut a couple of years ago. And today we're going to discuss about the challenges of composing, making money out of music, running a festival, being a producer, and whatever else happens. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for taking the time to talk with your busy schedule. Let's start where I know you started. Based on your bio and your public profile, you started a company as a producer back in the 90s. What got you into the film industry?
Well, it was more or less by chance. At this time, I had studied business administration, but also it was called theater, film, and television science. And I hated the film part at this time and was more into theater. And well, at the end of the studies, I didn't really know what to do, so I had done like 8 internships or something, and then at least I knew what I didn't want to do. But I'd never tried to work in an advertising agency, so I started there. There was some on my bucket list for internships, but never got one during my studies. And they made me the AV person responsible for this, and I had to invent a couple of things for marketing concepts. And of course, during my studies, I had already shot a couple of little things for WDR, did some radio, and so on. And at some point, I was somewhere in the middle. We had a little sound studio doing stuff for WDR and other RT clients. And I think in 1996, 1995, and in 1995, at the end of the year, someone called me and said, Michael, you have a space left over. Can we put in the editorial group from our new TV show? I said, well, if you pay, okay, no problem. They put in the guys. A week later, they called me again and said, Michael, can you come up? We need a producer. And I said, and asked, what does a producer have to do? And they said, I don't know either, but we have a production manager who will explain everything to you. So I met with this production manager, 20 minutes, and then decided to be the producer of a TV show for Friday evening for RTL. And that was the start of everything. And
that's beautiful.
Learned a lot on the way, of course.
That's the magic of...
Learned from mistakes, of course.
That's the magic of this industry, that it's always a surprising journey how people get where they are. And like you said, I think it's a very important thing for young people to know what they don't want to do. So try stuff, give them up, and life has a way of finding its way through frustration and mistakes. And I always find it so great that people are like, well, it's kind of an accident and a conscious one. So that's really beautiful. So you started as a producer there, and now, so many years later, what is a producer now in film based on having all this experience? How would you describe it now that you've been through it?
Well, I mean, I spoke about this the other night with someone. I said, I guess I could have never lived off producing, which is interesting. After doing, I think I've done 20 films. I'm now about to do the 21st. But at some point, I think that was already 2001, after 9/11, and suddenly it didn't make sense to work in this as a profession, because then it could only work with really big budget things, and you were not able to sell the rights in Germany anymore. So you had to start to make the money out of production and not out of selling the rights later, which was really a shift in the industry. And I think they have never recovered from this here in Germany. So you have to produce the way that there's money left over, but the more the budgets shrink, the more complicated it is. And also that is like this one project that we did. The time frame was they shoot in the US for 3 weeks, then they come and do the editing, maybe 3 months, and after 6 months the film is ready. And then the team decided to stay in the US for a year and edit it in the meantime, and the film was ready after 3 years. And so that is nothing that a producer could survive if you have only one leg where you can stand on, so you have to have multiple possibilities to earn money. And for us, we at I think the first 15 years we were parallel marketing agency for arts, for television, radio, and had like 5 radio programs from the WDR, lots of TV to do the publicity, and then the production and later events. And this worked out. It was a hell of work and lots to do, and night shifts and so on and so on. But at least it was fun, and something worked always. And that was the great thing about this. And for a couple of years it was so that everyone said, but you have to decide if you want to be a producer or a marketing guy or an event guy. And I always thought, no, why? And that shifted at the moment when we got one project where the US producers that had developed the thing said they decided against the big Cologne companies because they felt we would be the most stable company, even really the big players here in Cologne, and we were not so dependent on make a quick buck like all the others. And then I suddenly understood, also others understand that there is an advantage, and so I was happy ever after.
It's a real challenge when things in art become professional. Refinancing a project is almost harder than finishing an existing one, or it's an endless cycle of liquidity challenges, and actually having a more complex portfolio and a flexible team makes sense. I think the narrative of the industry was, until the end of the 90s, bigger, and for the people who want to make interesting content, movies, films, it's more important to have a sustainable organism, and financing yourself as an artist will always probably be a challenge, as much as we want to professionalize and stabilize the situation, because by nature it's almost like a farmer. It's a seasonal thing with a lot of risks, and a lot of things can happen. Corona proved that to everyone on the planet, that 2 years of everything freezing, the bigger the companies were, the faster their liquidity was at stake. And so what you're describing is also a good indication that we need a very sustainable way of approaching things. And the industry used to be, I'm a producer, I'm an executive, and now we have to all fit a few shoes to make things work, I guess.
Well, I think the interesting thing and also the bad thing is that things changed so much during the last 25 years. So when I started being an independent person without a salary, that was in 1993. And since then, so the first things we earned money was desktop publishing, because that was new. And it was a huge business to do catalogs and stuff. Mm-hmm. And people spent 80,000 euros on a catalog and 120,000 Deutschmarks at these times, or just for a catalog. And it's unimaginable. Today you would do this for less than 5,000. And the printing is cheaper, the layouting, everything is quite cheap. And so lots of businesses didn't become sustainable anymore over the years, and so you have to adopt and find new ways, and also to change yourself. Same with our Soundtrack Cologne, or
that's where I was getting to. I wanted to tell you that you read my thought. That was exactly what I was thinking. That conference started at exactly the point where the industry completely switched, and it has gone through streaming, through AI as the last thing. All the changes.
Blockchain.
A blockchain, exactly. So
all the fashions, yes.
So that's what I thought is really interesting, to go back to why that festival started, how it started, and to kind of observe how it has navigated the trends and helped people understand what's happening in the industry in the past 20 years.
Well, we started, I was doing some kind of presentation with the WDR for the former Filmmusik Biennale at the Bundeskunsthalle, and one of the last issues, or the last issue, I helped to set up a concert with Morricone.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly after this event, that happened every second year, of course, only, we heard that the next edition would be happen. They had already the funding, the competition was out, people had submitted, and suddenly they stopped the thing just in the middle of the process, and nobody really understood this. And I met with the person who did the film program, and she put me together with the last winner of the competition, which was Matthias Hornschuh.
Mm-hmm.
And there was another guy who worked at the competition as the organizer of the competition, Matthias Kappel. And we met, and we were quite angry that there would be no event on film music anymore. And so I think with less than 3 months in advance, we decided we have to do it ourselves. And that was the starting point of everything. We had this idea that WDR could sponsor their orchestra, because they would never give us money, but they could give us the orchestra for our competition. So that has been the core since the beginning, that the winner of our competition will get the orchestra for his first project that he wants after he's won. And that, of course, was a terrific award. And most of the guys used this to go to producers and say, if you hire me, then you get this orchestra plus a recording plus a conductor and everything for free, but you have to hire me. And that would make them immediately part of the game and give them projects where they scored with an orchestra, of course. And so I think most of our competition winners have become quite successful in the years.
And that is in years where you couldn't simulate an orchestra with a computer. So
exactly.
So that gave people the opportunity to have the magic, understand their composition, live it out, test it. And that's a huge advantage for a composer. And for younger people listening to this, before computers and libraries made that possible, you couldn't hear your music. So that sounds weird now, but that's something the festival did for composers that completely changed their trajectory and opened doors. So, and
I think it's still an important part for today, even if you can do it with mock-ups and everything, because you only will see what are the problems with a real orchestra if you've done it once, I think. And we do all the courses where we explain what to avoid and so on, and how to prepare the scores for the conductor and so on and so on and so on. But still it's different than if you have to do it yourself and you ask yourself, okay, can they play this really? Will this sound good together with real instruments?
It's also very often, can an instrument play that range?
Yeah,
really?
Yeah.
Does it sound good with the horns?
Exactly.
There's a lot of magic that goes on into a composition. It's not like a set of code where you prepare.
And how do I behave when I stand before these 60 persons? And how do you speak to the conductor and to the recording engineer? And which mistakes do I accept and which I force them to play again? And so on and so on and so on. So there's a lot of learning, I think, in this. And for us, it was, of course, a big step to have this. And at the beginning, the first soundtrack was more like the composers sitting there because they came all out of their cellars and had never spoken to each other. And they felt, most of them, this is my competitor, not a possible ally. And I think that changed over the year very much. At the beginning, there was a lot of I'd say complaining, crying, how bad the situation is, and so on. And but later the guys formed all the associations like Media Music, Composers Club, DEFCOM, and so on. We also started mostly at our place, and that had, of course, the advantage that they were able to call someone. Is this contract okay? Do you know a flute player who could come over? Stuff like this. So they formed bonds, and I think most of them also quickly became friends. So this is now, I feel that many composers are in a kind of brotherhood today in film music, completely different from the times at the beginning where they were really single fighters, alone, depressed in their dark holes.
That sounds funny, but I've been to the conference many times in the last 10 years, and I really have seen the latest example being the Female Association of Composers, that there was an initiative to give women more inclusion and also diverse groups. There's initiatives that Soundtrack Cologne supports, and I can see the tradition and how it evolves and how the inclusion and bringing people together and people retiring who did work for the community after so many years. So I think the importance here, and that was the reason to ask you to come, that people don't understand that a conference is not simply an event where people come and expose stuff and there's marketing and there's connection. There's a human aspect to it. There's a communal aspect, and it really creates a healthy industry because people come together, there's exchange. You just mentioned how many soft skills a composer has to have, and he won't have them in a conservatorium alone. And so I think when it comes to funding and why we should fund festivals, why we should fund art, the industries don't work without the work behind the scenes and the communal aspect that helps people grow. They won't grow on the job only. It's a process. So for me, it's important in a talk like this to highlight how many things that are not visible to politics actually happen due to such platforms where people go and they start as a loner who feels excluded, and a few years later they're on a board of a committee working together to preserve their rights or enhance the industry collaboration.
I think the visitors at Soundtrack Cologne, it started, looking back, it feels a little bit like a big therapy group. And then later it became like a motivational seminar because everyone went out, had the summer feeling, they saw what is possible, and they were looking at the opportunities. Then came Corona and also the big shock of AI, for the most of them at least. And suddenly it became like everyone fighting together against the visible foe, but at least invisible magics behind that they oppose on politicians and all these lobbying on the backside that the composers and the authors will never be able to put on the table because they have not the means. Like, I think 60 lobby groups from the other side lobby the EU Commission, and one person from the author side goes. So that is probably the relation.
To give our listeners and viewers context, in the whole streaming wars, before AI became an issue, there was a lot of lobbying in order for people to be compensated properly. As we speak, there's a huge action of artists leaving Spotify because those things, despite the improvements, have not monetized. There's no improvement in how musicians are compensated, and AI has become an instrument where people's work is plagiarized and used without permission to train algorithms, which then creates competition to their own work without permit. So in that process, the conference has started a conference in the conference about AI. also a study that you've been part of, the Monitor, that was released in 2024, also showcased the situation, the perception of composers, the industry. I will put a link in the podcast to that study. I find it very interesting because it gave insight on how composers feel against AI. And I think we could also talk a little bit about the use of generative AI and co-creation. I think that was the interesting thing at Soundtrack Cologne last year, to actually talk about it as a tool with clear rules for credit, for monetization, sharing, and what potential it has for people to use their catalog as their rent by selling their rights to other composers. So I think that those were some really interesting thoughts you had in the conference. Let's start with why did you start a stream in the conference about AI?
Well, I think the topic AI was around for some years, and we had already done some workshops even before Corona. And but it seemed nobody took it really serious until 2 years ago, where suddenly everyone saw it, and there was this ChatGPT. Everyone was speaking about this, and suddenly, really, it was out in the open. But people, of course, before did this. There was already competition in the Netherlands on doing songs with AI and stuff. We had a couple of workshops, which tools to use, and I think for a conference it's always great if something new happens, and if this new thing seems to be also something that is sustainable. Like at 2 years everyone was speaking about blockchain, but then that was suddenly over. I guess there are still people working on blockchain models, but that's not the fashion at the moment, where everyone is thinking about and having hopes or fears. But that is now, for the next years, I guess it's AI. And I thought AI has such a big impact on the world, so might be the most important thing for the next years. And it has so many aspects that we can't just cover it with 2 events or something and do all the rest like normal before. So the AI conference has a big part with media politics, which I think is very important to explain who's working on what, who's to support, also to give another hint that you have to get organized, that you have to be in an association, even if you're not 100% behind each and every aspect they try to look into, but in the general make stronger the position of your author colleagues and make stronger your own position in this way. So that was important, also to give a platform to invite politicians, to give them a feel about the industry, and I think that worked with the 2 events that we did already quite well. Then I thought there's a lot of people who are so against AI, or maybe not against AI, but never took the time to go into this and use this. And the big problem will be you won't lose your job to AI, in my opinion. You will lose your job to someone who uses AI, and he's quicker and faster and does the same workload in half the time or even less time. And that's a big danger. So you have to look into this, and you have to know which tools you can use. If it's generative or not generative, maybe you're just fine to do your music like you ever did, but with the tools around, you still can be quicker and do stuff very quick. So we have one strand that is more on developments, what will come in the future, what's next. Then one strand on tools and how to use them, and one strand is more for the amateur area that also goes into teaching and music schools and amateur choirs and what they can use to be quicker. But I think many of these things can be also be used for people that act as musicians or have a side strand as a band or something, or they teach. And so I think it's pretty logic to combine this all together. So it will be usually 16 to 18 events. And of course you get to know a lot of interesting people. And for me it's also good to be in contact not only with the composers, but also with the guys who in fact build AI software. And we came up this year with the topic that just came out of the talks in the break, which is that many of the AI companies really would love to license data ethically from musicians, but it's so complicated and it's not possible to do this in time. So that is also one reason why they do it unethical. So if you imagine you want to train your software in a way where you need data of millions of songs and in a specific way because you have a specific problem that you want to solve with your AI, then what is the possibility? You can go to the authorized societies, you can go to GEMA, BUMA, SACEM and so on, and it will take ages, and they don't only have a part of the rights, they don't have the master rights, they have only the author rights, and they might not have all the author rights, and they might have not the rights for every possibility where you would need them to train your AI. So instead of going to 150 authorized society all over the world, or maybe it's 500, I have no clue how many there are in the world, they have the thinking of them is we need a one-stop where can license the whole repertoire of the world in a specific way, and the data just prepared in a specific way so I can use them, and that's difficult. It's not done with licensing a little bit of production music with 150,000 songs, which is huge anyway,
Exactly.
but still it's not enough for them, and that's a big problem. And we did a full panel on this in Soundtrack Zurich with Suiza and Swiss Perform as the authorized societies, with someone from an AI company, and with Andy Weidinger from the board of GEMA, and it was totally interesting for everyone. And I think one of the first steps that Andy suggested to GEMA, he told me on the phone after that they put a phone number on their homepage who to contact at the authorized society, because they have this tariff, but who to contact, who to speak to.
Exactly.
Yeah, and this kind of minimum basic service for someone who wants to buy the stuff legally, ethically correct, and also on the other hand give the authors the possibility to earn something with this. So that has to be structured at the moment, and it's of course difficult situation for authors. On the other side, they have in some way their collecting societies have to do their homework. The labels have to do their homework. The publishers have to do their homework, because I think too many work on this level of we have an Excel which gives us some idea which rights we own and which not, and can we give these rights? Can we sell them? Has someone agreed and something? And that has in some way it means the revolution of the AI on the one hand is pretty clear and obvious, but on the other hand it means that the music industry has to become much more digitalized and much more caring about their own data.
Exactly.
And about control of their own data. So that is what shocked me most from last year. And this is a kind of insights that I get, and of course I'm trying to transfer them into actions and into making the right people meet, so these moves forward in a way in favor of our industry.
And in favor of a society in general, because the interests of composers are there. It's about informing consumers about how to consume. And I think AI is a clear example where people, and every one of us, we pretend we know about something that's completely on the edge technologically. It changes all the time, and we don't understand the implications. So there's people are emotional, they're negative about it because there's a constant misuse of people's rights by digital big companies. So everybody is completely right to be worried that their interests will not be being taken care of. But we have to adjust to the fact that if we as artists and publishers do not take care of our work for it to be there, to be used properly, the same thing will happen that happened with Napster. People are going to download it, and then someone will have an idea, let's do this in a more structured way, like Spotify. So gradually the industry has to progress, but it's also a responsibility from people to be informed. And I think that's where the value of the conference is, that a composer has to work on all those things.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see this week, of course, is kind of milestone in the AI thing with Universal doing these contracts with 2 AI companies and selling their rights to train, to use the stuff. And it's pretty clear why it's Universal, because I think they probably the company, as far as I know, they own about half of the world repertoire. So it seems they have their shit together. They know what they own and what they can license, and of course they on the forefront to make money out of this. So they have their data correct, they know which things they own, they give their authors the possibility to say yes or no, and everything that is open to be sold gets sold and gives the other person some money. And I think that's a kind of role model for the rest of the industry, and the rest of them have be very quick to catch up with Universal in this way to be successful in this new AI situation.
I think everybody has to accept that it's a reality, that the data will be used, and if we neglect to make ways for that to happen properly, it's going to happen
improperly. Yeah.
And so that's really important work, and it's a mix of legislation, politics, lobbying, composers coming together, awareness about technology, about music. So I think it's really, really, really challenging, and I think we're going to spend the next decade
absolutely
trying to regulate that and to make it productively. And the important thing is that composers don't lose their motivation. What I found really interesting in the Monitor study I mentioned earlier is that composers' motivation to be composers and do this job is not affected by AI. So people love creating and working with it. But there's a general fear that AI will substitute work, and I think what you said is it will substitute workers who are not capable of using it, and it will not substitute human aesthetic and intelligence and decision making. Because I think the narrative is that people want AI to substitute decision making, substitute politicians, substitute decision making, but we need an assistant that works fast so we make better decisions. That's, I think, the best use we can have as an AI tool. I had an interesting conversation yesterday because I was talking about composition. So to our viewers and listeners out there, a lot of people are asking, how is AI being used in composition and arrangement? I was trying to explain to someone I know that how does a composer use AI to orchestrate parts? Can you give us some examples of where technology is at the moment? How an arranger can use another arranger's data to make something in a style of, or get inspired, or...
Well, I mean, all of you have probably used stuff and tried our stuff, and most of the AI tools work this way, that you prompt the stuff, or you send in a song and say do something similar or whatever, and then something come out, and this is already music. And that's, for me, the part that is not really interesting for the future. What's more interesting was for example, what these guys from France do. I think they were there the year before, not 25, 24. They had developed a tool that puts out MIDI data and not music. And that is, of course, much cooler, because then you can work on the MIDI data and you can use your own sounds, and you can use the AI tool really as a means in your composing process. So you see there's interesting pattern, interesting rhythm, or an interesting arrangement, then you use it and you fill it with your own sounds and change a little bit so that the melody is more like you like it and not cheesy and whatever. And and suddenly it's something that makes more fun to play with, and it makes it's more logic to use this. But I guess I think that the more important stuff at the moment is even at least for the professionals, is not the generative AI, because there's always the problem that you don't know how secure is the training. Will there be someone sue you after using this? Because if we really use this music and licenses to someone else, it's difficult because you have a big risk with this. Of course, you can say, okay, nobody will do this ever, but it can happen. And as more tools there are to detect AI-generated music, the more certain it is. In 5 years, there will be some lawyer company that will sue 5,000 people per day, like they did in the last years with Datenschutzgrundverordnung, and where you get always have to pay 150 here, 200 there, or something if you didn't comply with basic shit, on your homepage. And that has become a business model for lawyers. So why shouldn't they do this with music? If you use music that is not yours and you infringed some copyright of someone else. And I guess that is a too big risk. If you properly license your music to someone and then you're responsible for this, that the rights are all yours, that you have licensed to someone else. So the more important thing are, in my opinion, non-generative AI and all the tools that surround it. For starting with stem separation, very cool things I've heard. There's, for example, this Cologne label Compact. They have released a song. I don't know if the story is real that they put in the background, but they said this song, the original singing of a woman from the 80s in the East Germany, and it was just on a shitty DDR, Democratic Republic video recording, and they took just the singing of her and put it in a really nice and mellow pop song with some basic minimal tech idea behind, and it's a beautiful song, and I think a lot of people bought it. But this wouldn't be possible years ago if this story is true and they just made it up as an idea. But the general idea to also to use old singing and do remixes in a way where there are no stems left or something, or just the recording, that's all very beautiful to work on, or even use it for sampling if you license this properly and so on. And of course, all the possibilities to do demos and to do quick mixes and so on and so on. There's millions of possibilities, I think, with this non-generative things. We did this workshop in Zurich where they showed us how the composer did a demo with a choir where he sung all the voices himself first, and then put on an AI tool that used just the musical material and then sang it with different voices, and that was quite beautiful. And I'm not 100% sure if you would really notice it wasn't a real choir at the end, and that was kind of shocking. So even as a mock-up, it was pretty good, and that felt also very interesting.
That goes back to the tradition of recording that people layered themselves multiple times. So we have to accept that there's a part of innovation that is also organic in its nature, because if he's saying every part, there's a little bit of a human performance there, and he adds a texture as if a synthesizer used to have one voice, now they have 32, 64. So I think we also have to accept that it's an aesthetic and a new language. So I think we shouldn't be completely allergic to anything that's artificial. In the 70s, Moog and Buchla were sabotaged by musicians' unions so that musicians don't lose their jobs. And today...
Wasn't it in the UK that you had to have a real drummer on stage, even if you didn't need one? Like at the beginning of Depeche Mode, they had to put someone on stage who would pretend to be the drummer, just standing behind the machine, because the musicians' union forced them to do.
There's very interesting stories about drum machines and the problems they created. Also, like in bars, there was a similar situation where they played bossa nova, but because it was a drum machine, there had to be a musician there. So that's where the part where it gets complicated. Or in the last podcast, we talked with Jan Lankis about Susanne Kiani, who is a famous ambient and modular synth user. And she was talking about how the unions, if you played 2 keyboard parts as layers, you had to be paid as an extra musician. So, for example, if you had a job as a musician and a violin player played 4 lines over each other, he would get paid 1 time, but also with time, the extra time. And the electronic musician would be paid 4 times the basic fee of the musician plus the hours. So it would make it completely not financially viable to use electronics. So I think that's the destructive part of making rules that are simply meant to preserve jobs. And we should embrace securing people's jobs and opening up a window for creative usage. To go back to the STEM separation, for someone who does not work on music production, that would be like taking the drums out of a song without having the microphones or the... So if it was a band with drums and saxophone and bass, you could completely segment the drums or the vocal to process it. And very often, especially in music produced on tape, the master cannot be separated. So that's for producers who worked in the past, that would be magic and a dream come true to be able to take something out, process it, master it. A good example of that is what happened with the Beatles documentary, where they took a lot of AI to save. Peter Jackson did it. He worked with a lot of AI to preserve small snippets from the rehearsal. So they used it creatively. And if you think about Beatles in the studio, all they did was innovate and break rules. So it was in the same spirit, and that is a good pop culture reference where one can see how that work influenced the result.
I think the really good thing about AI at the moment is, you know, when the internet started, most people would say, wow, this internet, that will go away. Keep quiet. It will go away. It's a fashion, 2 years, I give it. Or like when hip-hop started, where this guy from WDR was there, and I came to him and said, let's do a hip-hop game show. And he said, hip-hop, that's a fashion that will be gone in 2 months. That was 1995. And but today you must... Everyone can see that will not go away. You have to arrange yourself with that AI is around. So there's no reason to postpone the decisions. That's the difference to all other technical innovations. You could always ignore a cell phone for years, yeah, and you could ignore email or internet and so on for years. But this you cannot ignore anymore because it's everywhere and it is around you, and especially as musicians, you cannot ignore. And I think most of the musicians that I know at least use 5, 6, 7 tools, even if they're not aware that AI is inside, but they use it already. And most of them, I think, at the beginning felt ashamed. And we had this meeting at Media Music, I think 2 years ago, where everyone was sitting around the table and they wanted to speak about AI. And I think everyone felt somehow guilty that they used it. It turns out everyone used. 30 people sitting around the table, everyone already used 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different tools or had tried out them. And at some point it shifted from, you're guilty to use it, to this, what did you do with this? Oh, and how did it work? And the other tool is better, you really think? Okay, because that is quicker, and suddenly they were just into the creative process. And that was interesting to see, from just feeling bad of using it to seeing the opportunities as a group and exchanging each other and showing each other what was possible and open up on this. And I think that is the good thing about it, that everyone knows now. You can't avoid it. Yeah.
There's a similar story with Roger Lynn's drum machine that Prince famously uses on his record, that people thought this machine won't work. Anybody listening to music on the radio today, there's a drum machine in 70% of the tracks that are out there. So it's interesting how people go from not believing something will work, and then you have someone like, I'll take an example like Jadila, a famous hip-hop producer who plays a drum machine and it sounds as good, if not as unique as a unique drummer. So it's very, I think we have to embrace technology. What you said earlier is, I think people should really make an effort to understand the difference between generative AI, which takes pre-existing content and remixes it in different ways, or AI as a tool where a tool has been trained to eliminate, for example, the noise in my voice. Because that's a technology that a sound engineer would work 3 hours on. And I think we as a society want people to have a meaningful creative life and not sit there for hours micromanaging a technical issue. So I think that's a very good balance, and we can take the example of the Industrial Revolution in the last century. I'll take the example of a shoemaker. Some of the most expensive, wonderful shoes in the world are being made by hand, but there's millions of shoes made for everyday usage in an automated way. So we need both. And we need to make sure that people who are talented get paid properly and the product is there. But there is going to be competition between something cheap and something functional and something that is high art. I found it, for example, very interesting, again, in the report from 2024, the Monitor, that most AI usage was for promoting, production, and advertising, more than it was in the art domain. Here I'm referring again to generative AI. So I think that difference between AI and generative AI is a lot of what creates the conflict when people are talking about the subject, especially with responsibility. We all have to stand behind the people who do the art and who innovate and who take the collective human knowledge and add something special to it. So
yeah, you mentioned this AI monitor that we did with Professor Tigre Mugra from the IU University, and the idea behind was to give some insights also for politicians, how to progress with AI, how to answer on AI, and also for us as a Soundtrack Cologne, what would be the right way to go with AI. And I think it helped me a lot to understand that we're on the right way, that is absolutely necessary to show tools to people who have not used them, because there are these composers that have a track record of 60 films, but they have fears to use AI, or they never had the idea to use AI, or they even find the right approach to use AI because they don't read the blogs or whatever. So that was quite helpful for many of them, and that was also an outcome from the survey, that it's not dependent on the age if you're informed about AI, and it's also not too much dependent on if you fear to work with AI. In fact, the older target groups were more open to use AI than younger ones, and especially the middle-aged, mid-career people, they had the biggest fears of AI. And also, the more you know about AI, the bigger the fears were, which is also something strange, because normally with technology, the people who know how the technology works have less fears. And that was something that I thought, okay, we have to work on this. On the one hand, to take away the fears. Let's keep the real fears, but not the unreal, and just the stomach stuff, that has nothing to do with reality. And also give the politicians some hints. Well, for example, it makes sense to sponsor Soundtrack Cologne, because we do some work that is necessary for the industry. Yeah? And I think if you were at Soundtrack Cologne, you saw the AI trend was quite well visited, so there was a need for this with people. So people appreciated what they learned, and also later we saw from the figures of our own survey that it worked quite well for everyone. And I think we will do this survey again at the beginning of the year, so that we have with like 2.5 years apart, distant, to see how that emerged, because it's so quickly.
This is so interesting, because those are the 2 years where it became the main point of discussion, both for investors and the public.
And we'll see. I think for the next Soundtrack Cologne we should have this ready, and of course everyone should look at this in latest in beginning of January to fill out this form that will help you all. Yeah, you
had around 170 people working in the industry. I think that was a very big number, from producers to composers. So I read the document today before, with my morning coffee.
Okay, so you're more fit in it than me.
No, I was really, you know what my main thought was? I didn't know you would do that again, but I thought 24 is a really interesting point, because it's before everything exploded.
It exploded already in this year, yeah.
I'm talking more about the public perception, like if you...
Summer of 24, it exploded.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think what people are really afraid of with AI is the whole narrative of it's a dystopian thing, or it's a utopia where that substitutes every problem. I think both approaches go back to religious fears and industrial revolution.
Well, there's some things that came up to me that are disturbing, like people using it as a shrink, for example, and breaking up because the AI said you're doing right everything. And there was a survey now that lots that the AI has a tendency to always say yes, you're doing right. Validate what you do, and that if you would ask 5 friends, they all would say no, never do this, don't say this to this guy, don't break up because of this shit. The AI would say yes, break up, and things happening also around me. And that is quite shocking, that people don't feel able to speak to their friends, but feel able to speak to an AI, because it seems to be more neutral and not judging and so on. But the AI is not prepared for this, at least so far. Maybe they can repair it, but I think it will be a problem forever.
I read yesterday that they changed that it cannot give legal and psychological advice. I think it was in the press yesterday, but I will not commit to a statement here because I'm not informed. But I think I read it in the news. You're absolutely right, and I think there's aspects with AI where we can get into religious thinking, and also a form of psychological paradox where it operates like a mirror to our own perception, or it has aspects of a god that knows everything. Yep. So there is a very
That's
dangerous...
a big danger. So if you don't use it as a tool with all the flaws, what you would expect a tool to have, like a synthesizer who has flaws, or a computer that at some point you see the software has some bugs, but keep it as an omniscient, holy thing is dangerous.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, to go back to what you said about the conference, more than ever, as technology progresses, we have to work on our human skills and our social skills and working together. And the name of this company means of Enchoris. It comes from an ancient Greek saying that means to work in a circle, and that's also a quote for being happy. So I think we have to work in a circle, and whether we use machines or AI or weapons or instruments, it's always a collective experience. And I want to go back to financing events like Soundtrack Cologne. You went through an absurd sudden stop of your financing while planning the last year.
Before we speak about financing, should we just close up the AI thing for a minute? Because there was this aspect that you mentioned that I think I put into my opening speech, and I think that was some idea that I had when I thought about the AI development, that it, especially for composers with a very strong voice, with an own creative voice, on the long run, it might be very interesting to own these rights to your own music, because in my idea it could happen at some point, especially if you use AI on premise, so that doesn't source the music on the web but only on your own computers, and like many of the law firms do this today. They put in just the papers that they have written themselves, and then they let the AI source the text that they need to put it together new.
McKinsey famously has run its own archives through AI.
Who?
The consulting company, McKinsey.
McKinsey, yeah. But big law firms have this too, and I think that is pretty smart to have this. And then you, of course, can being much faster in setting up a new text or something. But if you do this with your own music, and you have an AI on premise with your own music, that of course would make it possible to, if you score a film, it should sound like you've done it before. Then of course you'll be much quicker. You have more time to be creative on some parts where you change what you've done before. So the stuff that is more the bread and butter thing is fast, and the other stuff gives you more time to do it. But on the long run, also, the question is, at some point, as a composer, you retire, and if then there's the possibilities that someone imitates your style and takes it over, or, in my opinion, you could license it to someone new who uses this with his AI, or he takes your AI, your intellectual property, and being your voice. So you inherit your special style, your all your data, all your music, to someone else, and who might follow in your studio. And I think that could be a good idea to start dynasties of film music. So the John Williams style goes for the next 500 years, and so at the end it makes also a kind of legacy that stays forever, because as long as people want to listen to this kind of music.
I had that talk yesterday because I was trying to explain that thought, and the talk yesterday was that was over dinner. It was about composers always quoted other composers, either
always,
as
yes,
a reference or a homage or even sarcasm.
Mm.
And I think it's really interesting how in the example Michael just explained, you have your own AI data set, you train it over years, you have the right to plagiarize yourself with a tool, and then you pass that tradition on to a next composer who pays for your life work. And that could be a way to both sustain a way of thinking, sustain a language, and people have always quoted. So how about if we normalize passing that on with very clear rules? And I think that's a very interesting situation, what you mentioned. And it allows for a language, like if you take something like Bach's Golden Variations, or I could think of something like Steve Reich's percussive logic. There could be variations of that go on for centuries with a new evolving style. So I think that would be a really interesting issue. And the hard thing for me in this approach is that it gets to the limit of our mortality.
Yeah.
That in order to think about those things, we have to accept our death, and we have to accept the ending of a story. And so...
Yeah, but who doesn't want to be immortal through his work? Everyone wants this at some point. So I think that's a good chance to become immortal.
That's very beautiful what you say, because in the end what stays is this
probably
little
your work.
Our little contribution to the world over some music, some...
It's more difficult with Soundtrack Cologne to make this immortal, which brings us to the idea of financing.
Yeah, I think before we wrap up the podcast, I would like to talk about the challenges of financing a conference like this. And we already talked about the benefits for everybody involved, politics, society, composers, even the industry itself. And you just came out of a crisis where your financing for the year was, I'll say, disturbed. would you like to talk a little bit about how you navigated that? And
well, I think we're again in a crisis, and I fear we will stay in a constant crisis for the next years. So at the beginning it was always very complicated because we are not really film, we are not really music, we are not classical music, we are not pop music. We might be creative industries, but maybe not. And so everyone was pushing us around from the funding side because they have clear, of course, models and rules where the financing could come from. After this was solved, we suddenly had lots of sponsors, all with medium sums, which was somehow fine, but also a lot of work because it's easier to do one application instead of 10. And also the accounting is a nightmare with all the different rules to comply to, and everyone is coming into us and doing and checking on our books. And so I think we have the best checked books in the world from the accountant side. And last year, of course, was extremely shocking because suddenly partners that have been funders of Soundtrack Cologne for 20 years suddenly said, "Oh, we're sorry, there's an economic crisis here in North Rhine-Westphalia. We can't do it anymore." And that was very difficult. And we had, of course, to talk a lot, speak to many people, explain it to new ministers, new heads of funds, write lots of letters to politicians and try to convince people. And at the end, we succeeded, but we even got more money than all the years before. But it was so late, so that the one funder just 6 days before Soundtrack Cologne, they decided on our funding, and the film fund 3 weeks before the Soundtrack Cologne. That, of course, that's really cool to have this money, but money that you have half a year earlier is worth the double, of course, because then you can spend it. Imagine flights, yeah. If you book them 5 months in advance, it's much cheaper than doing this 2 weeks before the event. So I think we spent the money well and survived this somehow, and now this situation is again same like this year. I know our Ministry of Culture, they have just decided 3 days ago that the cultural funding goes back to the budget size of 1922, which was the all-time high, and after this it went down. So there's a good chance that we get the funding from the Ministry of Culture again, but well, with other funders, we got now the decision of the city of Cologne to fund us for the next 4 years, but with less money than before. On the other hand, there is this minimum honorary system that has been introduced, which is nice for the people who get the money, but if you don't get more as the person who has to spend it, it's difficult, of course. And this kind of situation, I think, will go on for the next 2-3 years. But it's also a fight that the associations of the cultural entrepreneurs and cultural institutions have to do now, because otherwise there will be nothing left in North Rhine-Westphalia at the moment. It's difficult for everyone involved in culture, even if you're working for a city institution like a museum. Everyone has similar problems at the moment.
Thank you for this talk today. I think we made it very clear that even as technology and life progresses, human interaction, sharing knowledge and experience is vital. And I hope founders and politicians understand the value of people still getting together so we don't get alienated as technology progresses. I want to thank you for this talk, and I'm looking forward to look into the same subject sometime in the future. And I wish you a lot of luck with organizing Soundtrack Cologne and the other events for this year.
Many thanks, and many thanks for appreciating our work. And I hope you all will come to Soundtrack Cologne and meet in person.
See you there.
Because that's it about.
See you there. Thank you.
See you there.